Gnostic, Orthodox, post-Christian, Green Christian, whatever. Let's put it into a more Gaian shape, a circular globe, and let's realise that each continent of thought has a role to play, just as Africa, Australia, America, etc. do. So each type of Christianity is part of the Christianities, plural. And they all have their own, valid lineages. I mean, as a Druid Christian myself, who believes in reincarnation and thinks there's pretty strong evidence for that, and with strong Hermetic tendencies, and I have a particular niche within the cosmology of the Church. As an Anglican as well, I think that compromise between Catholic and Protestant provided a home for a certain degree of wisdom working. I've always admired, the Elizabethan Renaissance, Dee and Bacon, and on down to Newton and so on. I mean, that was made possible because of the miracle of the Anglican compromise, where you had the best of Catholic and the best of Protestant teachings. That was the theory anyway. Sadly, they've not always lived up to it. And the silence of Welby in the face of Brexit monstrous ignorance has been jarring to me. I think any true Archbishop of Canterbury would have been martyred rather than accept that nonsense. It's as if he's terrified of Parliament. I mean, come on, you're the Archbishop of Canterbury, man. Your ancestor, Thomas of Becket, he stood up to the king, even to martyrdom. Can't even stand up to some mad Tories that have hijacked Parliament through illegal means, So anyway, apart from that, I think that, there's hope for us all. But let me just reflect on something else about Irenaeus, because that's why he's of interest today. He had a complicated theory of theodicy. He basically argued that the reason for suffering and evil, why is there Brexit, is so that we can learn from it. Why was there World War II? Why did the Operation Barbarossa go and unleash its madness against people? Why did Stalin kill people, etc., etc.? Why? Well, Irenaeus tried to explain all that, and that's what's called a theodicy in Christian theology, which is a concept coined by Leibniz. And how can you have a just, good, loving God, and yet you have so much evil in the world? That was the question that Irenaeus also tried to answer. And he came up with a sort of a solution that basically it's there to test us. It's there to make us work harder at solving the problems. If we were born into a world of total, everything's paid for, everything's fine, everyone's living in bliss, it's like jacuzzi and everyone's just chilled out all the time, well, we wouldn't bother to do anything. Beethoven wouldn't have bothered to write his last quartets. Bartók would never have written his. Stravinsky would never have bothered to write the Rite of Spring, Rite of Spring, and so on and so on. Shelley would never have bothered to write his poems. And if I'd have had a totally easy, comfortable life, I would never have struggled to write the philosophical, poetic, and historical works I've done, etc., etc. So Irenaeus was saying basically it's there to give life a plot, a narrative, a meaning. It's interesting what Irenaeus has to say about theodicy. I recommend studying it. Where I don't agree with Irenaeus, and I think he was wrong, is that he thinks the Garden of Eden story is to be read literally. He thinks it all goes wrong in the garden, and that was a physical event in time, Adam and Eve, and the snake, and the apple, and it's been downhill ever since. And Christ came to set that right, to repair the damage. Well, I don't believe that the Adam and Eve story, Garden of Eden, is true. I think it's a myth. And I'm with John Hick, who was a critic of Irenaeus, who said, look, some of what Irenaeus says is great, let's keep that. But actually, thought's moved on a lot since those days. And John Hick, who was a great thinker, both of comparative religion and Christianity in particular, he updated Irenaeus' theodicy and said that yeah, we need to be a bit more intelligent about this. But the fundamental core insight, which is that life's suffering is there to strengthen us and enable us to overcome it, that we have to have a happy ending to history. That, I think, is a valid and valuable insight. Now, fast forward to COVID-19 planetary lockdown. What use is Irenaeus or John Hick now? Well, I think quite a lot, because, hey, we're all in suffering. 500,000 people have died, probably in some distress. The other day, I thought I got this COVID thing, I don't think I did, but one has panic attacks, right? And any of us could get it. Well, why? Why are we having to suffer like this? What has humanity done? Well, apart from God's judgment on our militarism and our stupidity, I mean, I don't agree with the American preacher who was raining down hellfire on COVID in typical American evangelical way. It's not my style. But I do think that, in a sense, it's a wake-up call to us to get our lives as a planet more in alignment with God's will, which is for a world of peace, a world of plenty, a world of justice and truth. We have to get rid of the evil, lying elites that run our scientific community and that run our political communities. This COVID thing is the product. Oh, I didn't tell you, Chris Busby, the great scientific contributor of the night, in answer to my question, is this engineered by man or is it accidental? He said he's done his research as a scientist, and he can say that it's human engineered. This is gain of function research. So we're all suffering from something, some mad, corrupt and deceitful scientific elites have unleashed on humanity. It's a Frankenstein nightmare. And they should be brought to book. That's why I've asked the UN to investigate under the Bioweapons Convention, find out who did this. Was this American? Was it Chinese? Was it, God knows, Porton Down idiots? Open the doors of all these labs, go in and look. And that's what Sacha Stone and his team are trying to say. They're not being enough focused on this. The fundamental thing is to find out the cause. And much as I admire Sacha Stone's Commission for Natural Justice hearings, they haven't focused enough on this absolutely vital point. If somebody's to blame for this and has done it, then we the people have the right to know that through the UN and the investigation that can be triggered through the UN Secretary General to initiate investigations of all the militarized bioweapons labs on the planet. So Irenaeus and John Hick, we're in planet lockdown, suffering because of human ignorance. The fall, symbolically, the Garden of Eden is explained by Kabbalists as a symbolic story about human consciousness coming into matter. Read the Zohar. These people like Irenaeus didn't know the Kabbalah. They weren't initiated into it, which explains the poverty of the framework that they were operating with. And it's, much later, I'm very interested in Christian Kabbalah and Cardinal Egidio de Viterbo, who was the greatest Renaissance Christian Kabbalist, who was a cardinal in Rome. And he was translating the Zohar into Latin and so on. And the Florentine Academy, Pico della Mirandola, and these people, they were Christian Kabbalists who knew what I'm talking about. And that lineage is the one that can explain how we need to combine our spiritual integrity, strengthen our thinking, our intellectual work, along with our spiritual magnanimity, our compassion, our love. And that is happening, I think. But also we need to reform our economic system so that the vast expenditures on militarism are refocused for human need. So these are some thoughts that I think Theodicy is up to us. God has devolved to each of us power to make a difference for the better, for the good. And that was the fruit, I think, of our festival of peacemaking. That was the thing I took away. Each of us has a duty to work as much as possible, network with others, the internet, or, other means. Letters are still quite good, telephone calls. network among ourselves so that we form a body of light workers so that we can resist the ignorance, the evil that has led to this planetary catastrophe. We can work with ethical scientists like Chris Busby and his team to rethink through science. Science, those shocking UNESCO heads of science that walked out of the Culture of Peace programme, they should be sacked. David Adams should get his job back. And the Culture of Peace programme should be put at the centre of what UNESCO does. It's what it's supposed to be doing. And a dear friend of mine, Dr. Carl Shapley's father, Harlow Shapley, professor of astronomy at Harvard, was the guy that put the S into UNESCO. He was a friend of Einstein, and Harlow Shapley would be shocked to hear that story. So we need to bring together the ethically attuned scientists to work with the philosophers, with the humanities specialists, with the religious elders, and together plot a course out of this lockdown, which is also an epistemic lockdown. We've been backed into this back alley of militarism by the Pentagon and its lackeys and its equivalents in other countries. Now, time for the nonagon, my friends, on top of the Pentagon, and time for peace. Right, I'm going to finish now with a poem, as is my wont, as a bard. This is the Mary Magdalene bibliography I put together for the Mary Magdalene Studies Association. That'll be the next big online Zoom thing I'm organising on her feast day, July the 22nd. I love Mary Magdalene because she was a real Gnostic Christian, and her gospel is amazing. I've done a commentary on it, which is on my Global Green University website. And yeah, I'm going to be talking about the Mary Magdalene perspective on planetary problems with, other theologians and speakers. Now, for the poem, I'm going to just read a little poem I wrote. I wrote this in India at a place called Nalanda, where I physically visited. I think it was in 2015, 2014, and I was absolutely overjoyed to finally get there. Nalanda was one of the great tantric Buddhist monasteries, universities of ancient India. It's close to the heartland where Buddha was born and taught. It's close to Pataliputra and the places associated with Buddha's life. And it was a huge monastery, which was a university, and they were built around quads like Oxford colleges or Cambridge colleges. And it was all rediscovered by British archaeologists when we were in India, who dug it up and rediscovered it. The tragedy is that it lived for about, many hundreds of years as a great institution of learning. And it's where Tantric Buddhism really developed. So they were studying all knowledge there. So maths, astronomy, astrology, metaphysics, esoteric medicine, cosmology, logic, ethics. Every branch of knowledge at Nalanda was studied in context and in juxtaposition to each other. And they were developing very sophisticated tantric models of reality. Sexology was part of their studies. They were male monks mainly, but the goddess was all important to them, and I think there were great Buddhist female teachers in the tantric lineages who were in touch with them. Eventually that teaching went to Tibet. Most of the great masters that took Buddhism to Tibet studied at Nalanda. And it's lucky they did, because they took with them copies of the text, copies of the artwork. All the great Tibetan art is inspired by what was done in the Tantric University of Nalanda. And they did it just in time, because when the Muslims invaded India, tragically and stupidly, some of them thought that these Buddhists were dangerous and should be suppressed. And they attacked the monastery of Nalanda and burned its library to the ground. And it had thousands, tens, hundreds of thousands of manuscripts. And they burned for 6 months. The smoke hung over the monastery, and people watching from the distance could see it burning for about 6 months. it's a bit as if my library ever caught, God forbid, you know, but that's why I'm so cautious about who I let come and visit and use of candles and all the rest of it, because libraries are precious things. I've spent 30 years building mine. The monks of Nalanda had spent 500 years building theirs when it burned. And lots has gone never retrievable, except through cosmic consciousness work. Because the most important thing about all that is enlightenment. If you go for that, you know, everything else is added unto you, as Christ put it. Some scholars say Christ studied also in a neighbouring university called Takshila, which was like a sister institution, and it is possible because there's so much of what Christ taught is so similar to what was being said in these advanced tantric Buddhist Mahayana universities. So who knows? Anyway, I'm going to read the poem I wrote there. It's called At Nalanda, and I'd been meditating when it came to me. The tiny ant, her needs compared to mine are so small. For water, she drinks perhaps only a drop of moonlight now and then. The monks of Nalanda used to come sit here and commune with this same ant's ancestor. Their cells, neatly laid out in rows, where cubicles of learning enticed you into a magical country of tanka making. Bowl-making denizens of future worlds in cognition, with the right view, the right planets, the right potions. All of this was miraculously preserved from generation to generation. Long-limbed boys from surrounding forests would creep in and seek refuge from samsara before telling their parents. Always the great goddess of the women, Tara, she of the round, splendid breasts like two perfect cupolas, smooth sheen, mauve tone, worshipped by the artist's hands, venerated for centuries. Why wouldn't Kali do? It was the mind wanted satisfaction, wanted to love and to please, not just the body. The body had centuries of sweat and ecstasy, perfumes and oils, pains and dying. Now the mind wanted somewhere to stand, to be, to recover, to work it out. And the mind needed a goddess. So Avalokiteshvara found Tara here, in the sultriness of warm nights, as the truth seekers sat late into the long nights, scratching with their pens. Right, shalom. That's At Nalanda.